It's Wednesday, the 4th of September. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blancolirio channel, and it's time once again already for another 737 MAX update. Today, we're talking about delays. What are the latest delays in the 737 MAX program? U.S. airlines were hoping to get the 737 MAX back online for the Christmas holiday rush season and get it back online right in early December. Other airlines around the world are already putting off their schedule until the beginning of next year, 2020. What do these current delays boil down to? Like we discussed in the previous update, a loss of trust. A loss of trust in the manufacturer and a loss of trust in the regulators overseeing the manufacturer. And this is the result of what happens when you let the money guys get a hold of a corporation and run off your experienced labor, run off your unions, outsource your programming to folks with minimal aviation experience, all in an effort to save money. Eventually, a mistake is going to be made, a mistake so huge that jeopardizes the very life of the corporation. Aviation is a very expensive endeavor and terribly unforgiving. When a new aircraft is certified, it's got to go through an FSB or Flight Standardization Board, and that's where pilots from around the industry will be selected to fly the new make and model of aircraft in the simulator, and I believe the actual aircraft itself, and make sure that this new aircraft conforms to the type certificate that this aircraft is built to, and that the training standards that the company is proposing will work. The 737 MAX originally went through its FSB in 2016, and it featured pilots mostly from the United States and a handful of pilots from the EU, the European Union. Now that the 737 MAX has to be recertified, Boeing is looking at who shall we have on board this current FSB or Flight Standardization Board. In light of the fact that the two 737 MAX fatal accidents occurred overseas, Boeing is gathering together for this FSB, for this board, more pilots from overseas, more low-time pilots, and more pilots with an MPL rating, or multi-crew pilot's license rating from the European Union. Let's find out more about this. ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, developed the MPL or multi-crew pilot's license rating back in 2006 to meet the burgeoning demand for new pilots, upwards of 17,000 new pilots needed per year. The new MPL rating allowed pilots to enter what's called an ab initio program, or get hired by an airline that's eventually going to put them to work. That airline will pick them up off the streets with virtually no flying time and give them upwards of 240 hours of flight training in a 45-week course. But out of that 240 hours of flying training, 210 of that will be in simulators. So you can get a person in the right seat of a transport category airliner type aircraft over in the EU with as little as 30 hours of actual aircraft flying time. Now here in the United States, things are considerably different, creating nearly two different levels of training standard around the world. But first we need to back up and look at a little aviation accident history. In February of 2009, Colgan Air Flight 3407 crashed in New York. That was the accident where a relatively inexperienced flight crew got involved with aircraft airframe icing while holding in icing conditions with the autopilot on, by the way, a captain that had previously flunked 3 check rides. The crew allowed the airspeed to deteriorate to the point where the aircraft stalled, kicking off the autopilot, and the pilot in command made a completely incorrect stall recovery. Instead of pushing down on the nose, he pulled back. Instead of getting the power full forward, he got somewhat less than full power, completely lost control of the aircraft, and was fatal to everybody on board. Some of the fallout from that accident included the Aviation Safety and FAA Extension Act of 2010. And this fundamentally changed the hiring requirements for airlines here in the United States, requiring both crew members, both the left seat and right seat crew members, to hold an ATP or Air Transport Pilot rating, which requires 1,500 hours of flying time, or a restricted ATP rating, which requires 750 hours of flying time. Prior to this, the left seater required to have an ATP rating, 1,500 hours flying time, but the right seater only needed a commercial pilot's license and 190 hours total flight time. So it's an acknowledgement of this difference in training practices around the world that Boeing is responding to in the recertification of the 737 MAX, and it's leading to some delays. Generally, when aircraft are certified by the FAA here in the United States or recertified, the rest of the world generally follows along. But now that we've had this breach of trust between regulator and the corporation, Boeing, regulators around the world are turning to their own regulatory agencies for approval. The European equivalent of the FAA here in the United States is the EASA, or European Union Aviation Safety Agency. The current executive director of the EASA is Patrick Kai, and he's not satisfied with the explanations that he's getting thus far from Boeing regarding changes to the 737 MAX. Kai goes on to say that the FAA's methodologies need to change. And so now the European Safety Agency wants to certify parts of the 737 MAX itself. Critical of Boeing's outsourcing of work, the EASA has formed their own group of 20 expert engineers, flight test pilots, and test pilots. There are 4 conditions that the EASA wants to see met before they recertify the 737 MAX for flight in Europe. 1, they want all the modifications to the 737 MAX to be approved by the EASA, not just the FAA. 2, they want a broader review than what the FAA did, of the design of critical safety systems in the 737 MAX. 3, they want a complete understanding of the 2 crashes of the 737 MAX, both the Ethiopian crash and the Lion Air crash. 4, they want to make sure their crews are adequately trained before flying the 737 MAX. So the EASA may very well require simulator training before their crews can fly the 737 MAX. Here in the US, the plan is to get 2 hours or so of iPad training for the 737 MAX crews, allow them to use their common type certificate and fly the 737 MAX, and then they'll get additional MCAS emergency training upon their rotation back to recurrent training. So whether the demands of the EASA has any impact on delays here in the United States remains to be seen. Regardless, 737 aircraft are still coming off of the line and being parked. A lot of those aircraft are being parked in Moses Lake, Washington, and as we learned from the last update, one of the hardest things you can do to an airplane is allow it to sit. So to that end, Boeing is hiring hundreds of new technicians to keep the aircraft serviced and up to speed and ready to fly again as soon as the green light is lit for the 737 MAX, especially out there at Moses Lake where they don't have enough technicians to keep track and keep current all the aircraft that are coming off the assembly line and being parked out there. So I hope this gives you a better understanding of some of the current delays that are impacting the 737 MAX return to service. I'll be doing regular updates on this as this story continues to unfold. Be sure and check your notifications on the bell setting next to your subscribe button to make sure you're getting the latest updates on the 737 MAX here on the Blancolirio channel. See you here.